Support for this podcast comes from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative, connecting communities with the resources, infrastructure, and networks to ensure a vibrant local free press.
From KVPR in Fresno, this is Central Valley Daily. It's Tuesday, March 31st. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Delano's long been considered the birthplace of the United Farmworkers Labor Union, and farmworkers there are struggling to process the allegations against the UFW's founder, Cesar Chavez.
This man was a huge part of Delano's history, is still part of Delano's history, and there's always going to be folks who are skeptical.
The view from Delano coming up later in the show, but first, these headlines. The first official Farm Worker Day is being celebrated today in California. The state holiday was formerly Cesar Chavez Day, but it was renamed last week following sexual abuse allegations that came to light against the late civil rights leader. Assemblywoman Alexandra Macedo of Tulare, who introduced legislation to rename the holiday, cited the need to honor the work of farm workers and not a single person. State offices will be closed in observance of the holiday. That includes government offices across the valley. Kings County and the city of Avenal are caught in a battle over the future of fire services for the city. KVPR's Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado has the latest.
A boxing tournament over the weekend in Avenal may have worsened a dispute over fire services between the city and Kings County. The Kings County fire chief says the city hosted the event in a building that didn't meet fire code. The fire chief, John Chamberlain, asked the event to be moved elsewhere, but the city reportedly ignored the concerns. Now, supervisors decided the city shouldn't get fire services from the county. It's unclear where this leaves the city of Avenal, but the city and county are already suing each other over a recall election, and that election is also tied to funding for the fire department. Residents say officials have not shown transparency on fire service plans. For KVPR News, I'm Crescencio Rodriguez Delgado.
California is the first state to require food makers to add folic acid into corn masa flour used to make tortillas and other foods. Folic acid is a nutrient considered important for a baby's development and early pregnancy. The law aims to reduce Hispanic infants' disproportionately high rates of rare and severe birth defects. Democratic Assemblymember Joaquin Arambula from Fresno says there are still disparities in Latino communities when it comes to getting enough folic acid in their diet.
In 1998, the United States mandated that we put folic acid into cereals and grains and to breads, but too many of our Latino families were not able to receive the benefits and to achieve the same reductions in neural tube defects that occurred when we fortified cereals and grains.
Opponents see the mandate as government overreach or claim folic acid is toxic without evidence. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy criticized California's law, but medical and nutrition experts praised it. A similar law takes effect in Alabama in June, with legislation pending or being considered in Florida, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Oregon. About 2 years ago, Merced College spent $27,000 investigating complaints into one of its longest-serving deans. The complaints did not find wrongdoing by the dean. But as KVPR's Rachel Livenall reports, the college now claims it has spent nearly that amount responding to questions by KVPR.
Multiple employees filed complaints against a single dean in 2024, but all claims against John Obano were dismissed following 2 third-party investigations. KVPR later followed up to seek details about the expense and the investigative process. Kelly Avila, the Vice President of Human Resources, responded in an unusual way. Apart from confirming the cost to investigate the dean, Avila claims in an email that the college district has spent more than $20,000 responding to public records requests from this reporting. In addition to that, Avila's response to questions by KVPR were first sent to some employees and then to KVPR. Avila said it was meant to show transparency. Avila said that further information requests about this story can, quote, impact resources that support students. For KVPR News, I'm Rachel Livenall.
Valley history is fascinating. Listen to KVPR's Central Valley Roots as we explore the stories of local people and places that make our community unique. Learn something new about our region. Listen to Central Valley Roots wherever you get your podcasts or visit kvpr.org/roots.
And now to our main story. Today is the holiday that for years has been known as Cesar Chavez Day. But as we've reported on many episodes of Central Valley Daily, the New York Times this month published a bombshell investigation alleging the late civil rights leader sexually abused and assaulted women and girls in the 1960s and 70s. And as we mentioned earlier, as a result, March 31st in California has now been officially changed to Farmworkers Day. Other states have scrambled to rename it too. And farmworker communities are reeling, especially in Central California, which became the cradle of the farm labor movement. KVPR's Kerry Klein has this story.
The small city of Delano in Kern County is surrounded by miles and miles of grapevines, orange groves, and almond orchards. Monique Reynoso says everyone here either works in those fields or knows somebody who does.
This is what drives and fuels our city.
Reynoso works for a youth advocacy group, but her parents were farm workers, and their parents. She leads me down an alley to a brightly colored mural that covers the side of a building in the center of town. It shows people in sun hats harvesting fruit and a little girl proudly holding a bunch of plump, purple grapes.
And it really showcases some of our local farm labor movement leaders, as well as, the diverse faces of Delano.
One of the most prominent faces on the mural is Cesar Chavez. He lived in Delano for 9 years. It was home to the first headquarters of the United Farm Workers Labor Union, which he co-founded. He's long been considered a local hero. As Reynoso looks up at his portrait, she says the allegations against him are heartbreaking. He was one of her role models. But she thinks this mural and the farm worker narrative don't need him anymore.
He's just one individual amongst, thousands of people who have been fighting for this and continue to fight for it.
Across California, statues of Chavez are being torn down, and elected officials are moving to erase his name from public spaces. Some in Delano are pushing for similar changes. A school district voted last week to rename Cesar E. Chavez High School, and City Council member Brian Osorio says leaders will discuss renaming Cesar Chavez Park.
Everything that we want to take into account for how does accountability look like at the Delano level will be on the table.
But he's not sure the city council will vote to make changes because there's a lot of resistance here. Chavez's union helped transform conditions for farm workers with higher pay, work breaks, even bathrooms, which weren't guaranteed in the fields. That changed people's lives. And that's why, Osorio says, many are struggling with the allegations against Chavez. Some even feel angry at his accusers.
This man was a huge part of Delano's history, is still part of Delano's history. And there's always going to be folks who are skeptical.
That includes Armando Pulido. He's a grape picker. Like a lot of residents, he says he doesn't believe Chavez's accusers.
Pues para mí, yo pienso que es mentira todo lo que están inventando de él porque él lo sacaron ahora hasta que ya falleció.
He says he thinks everything is a lie and they made it up because they came out with it now after Chavez died. He asks, why didn't they bring it up while he was alive? One of Chavez's accusers was Dolores Huerta. She was also one of his allies and co-founded the UFW with him. She explained why she waited to come forward in an interview with Latino USA.
When people say, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you tell people? Well, this is why. Because I felt that my coming out and saying that would have hurt the movement.
Two other women who came forward told the New York Times they did speak up previously, but nothing came of it. Whether or not the city ultimately erases Chavez's name from public spaces, some think this is an opportunity to highlight other pivotal labor leaders, like Filipino organizer Larry Itliong. Rogelio Gadiano is Filipino and grew up in Delano. He leads tours of local historical sites and wishes Itliong were better known.
A lot of Filipinos to this day, we always say without Larry Itliong, there'd be no Cesar Chavez.
Itliong organized farm workers for decades before Chavez and Huerta came along. And Filipino workers started the 1965 Delano grape strike, which later led to the founding of the UFW.
We got buried in history. We were the spark, the ultimate spark.
Whatever happens with Chavez's legacy, Gadiano hopes this can be the spark for more informed conversations about farm worker history. For KVPR News, I'm Kerry Klein.
And now Kerry joins me in the studio to discuss her story. Welcome back, Kerry.
Hi, Liz.
So first, I want to understand more about how regular Delano residents are feeling about the Chavez allegations. You included a farm worker, Armando Pulido, in your piece. Did you speak to any others?
Yes, I did speak to a handful of Delano residents just walking through downtown last week. Most of them did not want to speak on the record, which is why they weren't in the story. But, 3 others that I spoke to were just as emphatic as Pulido was. They were telling me things like Dolores Huerta and the other accusers must be lying, or maybe they're so old that they got confused about what really happened. One of them told me, I'm on Team Cesar Chavez. And, another person didn't put forward a stance so much, but said only God can judge what happened. And another person told me she just doesn't know who to believe. And so I think, a lot of this lines up with the reporting by our colleague, Israel Cardona Hernandez, who spoke to a handful of farm workers, earlier in this whole saga. And many of them shared the same things. They had a lot of doubts over these allegations and a lot of conflicting feelings. And it shows that this issue is just really not clear cut, even despite, this very prominent public narrative that's driving Chavez's name to be erased from a lot of public places.
Yeah. Well, can you speak a little more to Larry Itliong's history and the history of Filipino farm workers in this country?
Yeah, so Larry Itliong was born in 1913 in the Philippines. He came to the U.S. as a teenager for more economic opportunity, and most jobs that were available were farm work. There were waves of migration from the Philippines to work in the fields, around that time. Itliong worked up and down the West Coast, including salmon canneries in Alaska. And farm work was really tough then, even tougher than now in a lot of ways. There was no ability to unionize. There were far fewer labor rights, fewer protections. There weren't even bathrooms out in the fields where people were working. So Itliong began organizing strikes in the 1930s. He took a break to serve in World War II for the U.S., and after the war, he returned to Delano, returned to the fields, and he helped form a union that was primarily for Filipino farm workers. And he was working with this union, leading this union, when he organized the historic grape strike in Delano. And a little known fact that I mentioned in the story is that the first workers to strike in that instance were the Filipinos in this union, and that Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta and primarily Hispanic farm workers joined the strike later, a little over a week after it started. And these organizations are the ones who later came together to found the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, which later just became the United Farm Workers Union. So Itliong continued organizing until his death in 1977. And then obviously we know that Dolores Huerta and Cesar Chavez also continued organizing. Chavez died in 1993, and Huerta is still continuing her work today.
You mentioned Cesar E. Chavez High School is set to be renamed in your piece. What is the latest on that decision?
Yeah, so Delano Joint Union High School District met last week. There was a lively discussion. A lot of people came out for public discussion about this, and people were arguing on both sides. Many argued that the name should be changed, but also many argued that they should keep it because of Chavez's role in history, farm worker history, city history. Ultimately, the district board did vote to change the name, but it was close, 3-2. It was not unanimous. And they have yet to decide what the high school name will actually be changed to.
Okay. Well, you also mentioned that some items could be taken up by the Delano City Council, like renaming Cesar Chavez Park. When will the City Council be meeting next? Do we know?
Yes. The next City Council meeting will be April 6th. As you heard in the story, Councilmember Bryant Osorio seems to think a lot will be on the table, potentially renaming Cesar Chavez Park. There's also potentially making changes to that historic mural downtown that features Chavez so prominently. But again, he thinks, the outcome isn't clear. There are a lot of political divisions in the city council, and so we'll see what happens then.
KVPR Associate Editor Kerry Klein, thank you very much for this reporting.
Yeah, thank you.
And that is today's show. Have a story idea for Central Valley Daily? Maybe feedback for the show? Reach out to us. Email podcast@kvpr.org. Today's episode was produced by Kerry Klein, Jonathan Linden, and KVPR with support from the Central Valley Journalism Collaborative. I'm Elizabeth Arkalian. Find the latest local news anytime at kvpr.org.
This is Tanya Mosley, co-host of Fresh Air. You'll see your favorite actors, directors, and comedians on late-night TV shows or YouTube. But what you get with Fresh Air is a deep dive. Spend some quality time with people like Billie Eilish, Questlove, Ariana Grande, Stephen Colbert, and so many more. We ask questions you won't hear asked anywhere else. Listen to the Fresh Air podcast from NPR and WHYY.